group leader in Orlando,
And
as we all.
I have my co-lead Elisa just joined. Hi Elisa.
Hey everyone.
You made it.
I did.
And so first of all I want to thank you all for joining with our session, and we have our famous Mitchell. Yeah. Hi Mitchell. Now it is over to you.
Well, hello. I don't know how famous I am, but I am certainly happy to be here. So I'm also at this session in Texas at Texas Dreamin'. So we are going to basically do a recap of that session. Let me get my screen shared here. Awesome. All right. So show of hands in chat or reactions or whatever you'd like, but how many of you are afraid of Apex? I'm seeing hands raised. Yep, that makes sense. Yes, I was one of those people for a long time. The good news is that there are programs out there to help you be less afraid of Apex. One of those is called Rad Women Code. So for anyone who identifies as female or non-binary, it is a group that runs 2 cohorts a year. And if you've got at least 2 years of admin experience, their goal is to help you learn how to become a developer if that is kind of your career goal. So part 1 is for everyone who wants to kind of learn how to read and understand code, write some of the basics. Then they also have a part 2 that goes a little more in depth for those who want to actually have a career as a developer full-time. So not only have I taken those classes, not only developer, but also architect full-time. You can take part 2. So I've taken both part 1 and part 2 and actually come back as a coach. And to me, it was very important to come back as a coach because as much as I love the fact that they have a bunch of volunteer developers coming and teaching, they all spoke developer and I didn't understand because I don't speak developer, I speak admin. And so being able to make sure that we can translate some of those concepts into things that admins are familiar with was really important to me. And so that's why I wanted to come back as a coach and help other people kind of get past that gap. And it occurred to me that while it's a 10-week class and we go through a lot, I could share some of the things that I learned and some of the things that I started teaching with a larger audience in a much shorter format, say, I don't know, 40 minutes to an hour. So that's kind of how this came about. So just a little bit about me. My name again is Michelle Hansen. Nice to see meet you all. Currently, I work for Slalom as a principal consultant. And I do a little bit of everything, mostly solution architecture, but I also get my hands in and build on the platform. And so if we need some Apex code written, I can do that now too, to some degree. But certainly when it gets a little more complicated, I'm still picking up the phone and calling our developers and saying, hey, come staff my project to write me some code. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You don't have to decide, all right, if I'm going to learn Apex, then I better learn how to write every single Apex line of code that's out there. That's definitely not where I'm at, nor where I really want to be. Here are the goals for the session. Number 1, I just want you to help you understand that Apex doesn't have to be scary. It's seriously just another kind of automation. So if you're comfortable with flow, if you understand, process builder or workflow rules, even you understand the basics of automation. When I do thing 1, I want X, Y, and Z to happen. When I do thing 2, I want A, B, and C to happen. That's really all we're doing with automation. And it's a question of how do we tell the computer when thing 1 happens, do X, Y, and Z. I also want to help you build some confidence in reading some easy or medium complexity Apex. We're not going to get into anything super hard, but I just want you to start recognizing patterns. And to help you do that, we're going to start connecting our concepts in Apex with flow, where you're already kind of familiar with it, hopefully. And really, this should help you be able to understand Apex a little bit better, be able to work with your developers better. Maybe someday you'll actually want to make a small tweak to your Apex code yourself. What this is not about is saying, okay, open up a blank dev console Apex class file and start writing code. Like 100%, that's not where we're going. No need to feel daunted by a blank text editor. Okay, so let's start with some basic concepts. If we're in Flow, anytime we want to work with something, we need a variable. And so there's a couple of different types of variables that we can have. Number one, we call them primitive variables or simple variables. They're things that are just a box that holds something. So text, number, currency, Boolean, which is true or false. We're used to seeing these kinds of variables in Flow, and we have equivalents over in Apex. So in Apex, you have something called a string. A string is just what they call text. You also have kind of a special ID that we don't get in Flow. In Flow, if you want to hold a record ID, you use a text variable. You can actually call it an ID in Apex, and it'll be like, okay, I'm expecting either 15 or 18 characters, and I know this is really a record ID. It can't be anything else. It can't be like, hello, for example. Numbers, when we create number variables in Flow, we'll tell it how many decimal points we want. In Apex, we do that by deciding what kind of number variable it's going to be. So an integer, obviously, if we remember from our math classes, that's got 0 decimals. That's our whole numbers. So then decimals and doubles are what we can use for things that have, not integers, decimal points. We have currency in Flow specifically that actually gets formatted. They don't have that in Apex. You just use Boolean, date time, they all pretty much match. At the time of writing this, we had a time variable in Apex, but not one in Flow. I think that actually just came out in summer 25, so I'm going to have to do some updates. But then there's also a few things that Flow does a little better than Apex. So in Flow, we can actually pull pick list and multi-select pick list fields and create variables of those types. Apex doesn't have an equivalent at all. So if you wanted to do that, you would just be using string variables and putting in your pick list values. And then Apex kind of has this concept of a blob. Now, a blob is generally what gets used for like a Salesforce file or an attachment. And so while we can use files and attachments in Flow, there's not a specific type of variable that goes with them. But honestly, a lot of times the things that you're most like comfortable seeing, things like text and number, Boolean, they match pretty well across. Sometimes we just call them different things. Okay, so if we want to create value with a default or a primitive variable with a default value, we can do this in Apex in one line. First of all, we call it the data type of string. Then we give our variable a name, first name, and then on the other side of the equal sign, we set our value to Michelle. So this is exactly the same thing that we do in Flow. We create a resource type, we give it a name, we can give it a description here, which Apex doesn't really let us have. We'd have to use comments. We set the data type. So again, string equals text here. So we're using the equivalent language. And then we can give it a default value of Michelle here. So really, these two things are doing the same. This is just, I'm typing it all in one line. This lets me fill out basically a user interface, like a wizard. But at the end of the day, these are exactly the same thing. So if you see something that looks like this pattern and it's got a blue word up front that looks like a variable type, then it's got something else in black that looks like a name and then it has a value, we're just setting a variable. That's all we're doing. All right, so to get a little more complicated then, we have record variables or S object variables. So S is Salesforce object. And so what this is Salesforce has said, hey, we've got an entire database full of objects here. They have all of these fields on them. You've taken all of this time to configure them and build them out custom for what you need. We can take that object configuration and make it available to you. So we can know what fields are standard fields that Salesforce gave you out of the box. We can know what the custom fields that you built are. We understand what the required fields are. And so basically to get into these complex variables, these record variables, we use something called dot notation. Now, again, show of hands, comment in chat, whatever. How many of you have ever written a formula field? Anybody afraid of formula fields? So you're already pretty familiar with dot notation. And if you've ever used a flow, You've also probably used your dot notation. So let's talk about how we create an S-object variable. Now, what we can't do in Flow is set default values for an S-object variable. You can in Apex, which I don't have on screen here because I wanted to keep the comparison apples to apples. But I would actually be able to come in here and set all of my default values for my account if I wanted to. But to also show you the difference, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do an account. So that's our variable type. So where we had string before, now we have a variable type of account. We're going to call it new account, and it's going to basically be equal to just a new empty account variable. And so again, in Flow, same thing, use our resource type of variable, give it our name, new account. In data type, we say, hey, this is a record. And so Salesforce goes, okay, cool. Then what kind of record? So we have an extra step here to get to this data type. So account here is the same as the object. We have the name. And then because we can't set a default value, we just say, hey, this is a brand new empty variable right now. So this is the equivalent of you going to the account page in Salesforce and clicking new. It opens up the screen where you can start to fill in all your fields. And so that's basically where we're at. So then to populate an S-object variable on the next lines of code, what we can do is use that dot notation again. So new account is our variable. And so we're going to use dot notation to get into the fields and say, okay, so new account object dot name is going to be test account. My new account object's billing city will be Portland. Billing state, Oregon. Type is customer direct. So again, we do this on separate lines in code just to keep it easy. And we do the same thing in Flow, but we use assignments. And so when you're typing in and actually selecting these things, you use that same dot notation. So my new account variable in Flow, when I want the name field, it just gets a dot name. So same thing here. I can create test account as the name, either in Apex or in Flow. And then, of course, they make it all pretty when you click out of it in Flow. So new account and then billing city with a little caret. Really, under the hood, that's just a dot. So all of this is already using dot notation. So whether we do it in Apex or we do it in Flow, we're doing the same thing. We have a variable called new account, and we're setting fields equal to values. Everybody with me so far? Making sense? Feeling okay? Cool. Some of you I can see, Elisa, I am completely leaning on you because you're on camera. So thank you. All right. So the joy of collections, right? So in Flows, we get one kind of collection, but Apex actually has multiple. So in Flow, we have what's called a list. And so a list is multiple items of the same kind, but they're in a specific order and it allows duplicates. So if I put this in a list, it would be number 1 apple, number 2 pear, number 3 banana, number 4 apple again. So if I ask you, hey, what's the third thing on my list? You'd be like, banana. And so it's like, okay, cool, thanks. And we can look that up and figure out what's in a position in that list. A set allows you to have multiple items of the same kind, but they don't necessarily go in a specific order, and you can't have duplicates. So if I were to make my fruit into a set, there would only be 3 things in there. There would be pear, banana, and apple, because I can't have apple twice. Sets in Apex are absolutely wonderful for doing things like finding unique values. So if we want to avoid duplicates, or if we're grabbing all opportunities that are closed one, and then we need all of the accounts so that we can maybe notify the accounts of a closed one opportunity. Well, you can have multiple opportunities on one account, right? So instead of me sending an account 3 emails for 3 opportunities that closed, I just want to send 1 email to that account. So being able to add them to a set, I'd add account A, account B, account C. When I go to add account A again, it'd be like, yep, already there. Don't need to add it. Thanks. And so then by the time I'm done, I only have a list of 1 account in the set, instead of in a list where I could have the same account multiple times. So then the last thing that we have in Apex is this concept of a map, and there's no real equivalent for this in Flow or anywhere else. The closest thing I've been able to kind of come up with as an analogy is this is like a VLOOKUP in Excel. So if you've ever used a VLOOKUP in Excel where it's like, hey, I've got some data in column and I need you to go look in this giant spreadsheet that has 27 columns in it and find what is in column 7. And so we do a VLOOKUP and we say, okay, give me what's in A1, go look in this other sheet in cells A through Z, give me back what's in column G. So basically it's a key and a value pair. So the key is unique. So in this case, our state abbreviations for Louisiana, Missouri, and Oklahoma are our unique keys. And then they all map to a value. So LA is the abbreviation for Louisiana, MO for Missouri, OK for Oklahoma. So when you start to think about things in Salesforce, if I had a record ID and I had the rest of that record, I could very quickly look through a list and find the record ID and then grab the record that's associated with it. And we can skip doing loops by using maps. It's a really cool functionality that the more I learn about it in Apex, the more I'm like, okay, Flow totally needs maps. So maybe someday. All right, so we can do this a few different ways in Apex. So first, declare a new list of strings. And so we do this by using our data type of list. And because it's now a collection variable, we need to get more specific and be a list of what? Well, it's a list of strings or text. Then I'm going to name it fruits. And so this is actually on line 1, just an empty list. So I've got a list of nothing. Then I add things to it one at a time. And so I put in apple, pear, banana, and apple again. I can also do this all in one fell swoop. So with my set, same thing. Data type is set. This time we're going to use integer. So we have whole numbers. Odd numbers, we add them to our set in the same line. And so I'm setting default value to my set of 1, 3, 5, and 7. So it wouldn't make sense for me to be able to put an odd number in the list twice. I wouldn't want it to be 1, 3, 5, 7, 1, 3, 7. Again, like that's weird. Why do you have odd numbers on here multiple times? So then our state abbreviations map, this is where we set it. And so because it's a map, it's got 2 data types. It's got the data type for our key and a data type for our value. They don't have to be the same. So we could, for example, do a map of days of the week and the number that that day of the week corresponds to. So if you've ever used a formula to figure out, is it a weekday or a weekend? Maybe if you're dealing with Service Cloud, you go and you figure out, okay, so what day is July 8th, 2025? Well, today is Tuesday. So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, that is day of the week number 3. So what is I could have a number here and a string and be like 3 is Wednesday or 3 is Tuesday, 4 is Wednesday, something like that. But again, we're doing that same kind of thing that we did with our list. We set up the data type. We tell it what both the key and the value were going to be. We give it a name. And then we say, hey, it's a new map. So right now it's empty. And then instead of using the add keyword, we use the put. So we put this in our map. And we say, okay, our key is Louisiana, LA. That value is the actual full state name. So, hey, awesome. We have an Oklahoman. Hello, Amber. Glad to use your home state in my examples today.
Hey, you do. I cannot stand. I don't affiliate with the politics, but I do love being from Oklahoma. So I love that you're using Oklahoma and the surrounding states too, Missouri and Texas.
Absolutely. All right. So in Flow, we just get a list. If you're building a collection in Flow, it is a list. That's just the only one that they give us. And again, to do things like this, we use an assignment and we just get to use add. So we have a list of fruits and I'm going to add apple, pears, bananas, and apples again. And then I have another list called odd numbers. And again, I'm going to add my 1, 3, 5, and 7. So this would add 1 or 3 or 5 again, and it would let me because this is a list in Flow. we can't really dedupe it. We'd have to do other things to then go through and pull out from that list anything that's a duplicate to leave us basically our unique values. But that's the good thing to know, is that while in Apex, you have the ability to force it to be unique with a set, no such luck in Flow. All we get are lists. Okay, so now that we've talked about the variables that we're going to be using, let's talk about how we put variables together into actual code. So your code gets organized in things called classes. You've probably heard about an Apex class. Honestly, that's just a document that holds your code. So there's nothing super special about it. You're just going into the dev console and you're creating an Apex class. And that's just where you write your code. That's where it lives. And all of the organizations that are out there have different approaches on how to organize all of their code. So each dev will get taught a different way, or come up with their kind of own. And so then it's up to them and their company and their coworkers to really decide on a strategy that works for everybody. So a lot of times we might make classes by objects. So I might have an account class and an opportunity class and a case class. And so basically it's a way to organize your code. Think about Windows Explorer on your computer. If I wanted all the documents that were related to accounts to be in a single folder so that I could see everything about accounts, if I put all of the code that relates to accounts into that account class, it's really easy to find because it's right here. It's all in that class. Then they also have something called a handler class. And the handler class and utility class is what threw me so hard as a baby dev going through RAD. Because I'm like, all right, what's a utility class? I don't understand how to make a utility class. I don't understand what a handler class is. And so finally I had to ask one of my dev friends. I said, I need to ask you dumb questions that I'm embarrassed to ask, but if I don't, I'm never going to understand this. I'm like, what the heck's a handler class? And I said, while we're at it, what am I doing with the utility class? How do I make one? Because they never taught us how to make a utility class. And he's like, they're just classes, but they're used for special things. So an Apex class is an Apex class. It's just what it is. But a handler class is specifically designed to be like a traffic cop, right? So if you've ever gone to a big event and you're all trying to leave the parking lot, you know, there's usually a police officer in the middle of an intersection that's like, all right, you stop, it's your turn, you guys come this way. And then he's like, all right, fine, you stop, now it's your turn, you go this way. And so a handler class is designed to handle what the Apex trigger is asking to be done. So it basically just, when a trigger fires and there's work to be done, I'm the one that basically says, all right, code, you run first. Now, after you run, it's your turn. I need you to run over there, but you stop. Wait a minute. It's not your turn. Oh, you over here, come back. I need you to run now. And so that's what a handler class is. It's just handling all of the work that needs to happen in a specific order. So it's a way to organize your code and make it run a specific way. A utility class, on the other hand, is the place that you put stuff that doesn't go anywhere else. So utility, like utilitarian, it's flexible. You can use it for a lot of different things. So I have a friend who's a developer and he says, I ended up writing a date utility class every time I needed to write a piece of code that dealt with dates. So what day of the week is 3? Okay, well, that's Tuesday. Or what is 6 months from a given date? So what's 6 months from today, for example? Cool. Well, I needed that on account because that's when we have a due date to do, you know, something. But I also needed that on opportunity. So it doesn't make sense to put that code in the account class. And it doesn't make sense to put that in the opportunity class. And you know for sure it didn't make sense to write it and put it in both classes because we don't do that. And so what he did is he built a utility class where he started stashing all the stuff that was either multi-purpose or to fit somewhere else. And just like you have a junk drawer in your kitchen where all your pens and your scissors and your takeout menus and the old chopsticks and that ketchup packet that you didn't use with your fries all ends up, it's where the code goes that doesn't go anywhere else. And it's just a utility class. It's what they call it. And once I figured out that it was just a class of the Apex code, and it's the stuff that doesn't go somewhere else, light bulb, I got it. We're good. So just like we want to control who can access certain things with Flow, we can do that in a different way with Apex. And so where with Flow, we basically decide access usually by profile or something. There's something called an access modifier on class to determine what other code in the org can access what's in that class. So it can be private, which means only things in that class can get to other stuff in that class, or protected. Public means basically any other code in the org can go into this file and run code that's there if it's told to do so. Global is interesting. This is where you get into like managed packages and things. But it's just interesting to know that you're sometimes going to see these things when you're looking at an Apex class file and that they actually mean something important. Also, the class keywords to determine what context the code runs in. This has an equivalent in your Flow advanced properties. So you can run a Flow in system or user context. And in user context, you can use it with sharing or without sharing. So if sharing is enforced, you're only allowed to manage records that you are shared to. If you run a Flow without sharing, it doesn't matter if you have access to that record or not in the UI. The Flow can see it, work with it, do whatever it wants. And so they have these same kind of keywords for your Apex code. So to kind of tie this back, if we were looking at a Salesforce Apex class, it's generally speaking the equivalent of your Flow. So a Flow definition, when you open up the canvas, that's as close to the equivalent of a class as we're going to get. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's pretty close. So if we look at an example in code, we've opened up what we call trigger handler. And so we have our public access modifier up here with sharing. So you're only allowed to see words that you have access to. And then we call it a class because it's a class. And so we actually have to say that it is a class file. And then we give it a name. So the name of this class is account trigger handler. So then everything after that is the work that's going to happen in this. And so these are chunks of code called methods. But before we get into that, let's just look again at how this looks compared to Flow. So we have the public with sharing class, account trigger handler. We can do the same thing in Flow by running it in system context with sharing to enforce record level access. If you run it in user mode, that also generally is inheriting the sharing settings of that user because you're running it in user mode. So it's just defaulting that way. Okay, so inside of our class, we have methods. So methods are chunks of code that actually do the work. So that's the whole point of having this code, is to do something like every time we create an account, create a task to send them a welcome package. Or every time a case is closed, send an email to the case contact letting them know that their case has been closed. So the methods are what actually does the work. Now we have some methods that you can be call or execute from within another method. So I can be over here reading through this code, and all of a sudden it'll be like, hey, wait, code over there. Can you do your thing? I need you to do your thing right now. So you can actually call one set of code from within another set of code within another method. And so again, we take our kind of Flow definition analogy here, and now we're going to tweak it just slightly. So the elements in a Flow after the start menu are basically the same thing as a method, because the work that's performed by the code is in the method. The work that's performed by the Flow is basically all of the elements that get touched. And so other than the start menu, or the start box, I really don't remember what it's called. It's a start box now, which is slightly different. The rest of your Flow is basically the same thing as your methods. And so the equivalent for this method that you can call or execute from other places in the code, that's your subflow. So if you've ever written a flow that does something specific, maybe for error handling, like every time you encounter an error in a flow, it logs something and it sends an email to the admin going, hey, something just happened and I've logged what went wrong. So everywhere that you're going to plug that flow into another flow, you call it as a subflow. And that's basically the equivalent of being able to call one method from another. So again, we don't want to type that out multiple places in our code, just like we don't want to build the same actions over and over again in different flows. We just put it in a subflow and then call that subflow wherever we need it. All right, so looking back at our class again, we have our class. It has 3 methods, and I just shrunk them all up so you can't really see anything other than it's got these 2 little curly brackets with arrows in them that says, hey, there's something here. So if we expand out this one method, so we're going to use our public static void handle before insert method. And so what this does is it says we're expecting an input variable. So I need a list of accounts to be able to run this. And so we're going to get this from our trigger. So when a new account gets created, or when we data load multiple new accounts and they get created, I'm going to put it in this list called new accounts, and I'm going to pass it into this method so that we can work on it. So one of the big differences between Apex and Flow for record triggered flows is they're designed to run on one record at a time. That's why Flow gives us this cool little $ record variable. And it's like the record that made the flow run whatever record that was. In Apex, everything has to be handled to deal with bulk. So we have to expect multiples at a time. So everything that we get in is going to be in a list because that's what Apex requires. And so we're going to get a list of new accounts. It might only be one. So we have to go through and we have to do a loop on everything. So we'll dig through what this actually does a little bit later. But basically what it says is before we insert the account, I want you to go account record and I want you to look at the estimated annual sales field. So I have an account labeled A. So then we go dot notation. If that account record A's estimated annual sales field is greater than $5 million, I want you to set the priority field of that record to highest. If it's over 3 million, then set it to high. If it's over 1 million, set it to standard. Otherwise, set the priority to low. So all this chunk of code is doing is it says, go look for every new account at this estimated annual sales field and set the priority based on the number that's there. Like legit, that's all that's happening here. Okay, so we can do something similar with another method over here that we run after insert. And so this code says, all right, every time we get a new account created, I want you to create a case. Okay, so instead of creating a task, we're going to create a case. And so we create a list of new cases that is empty so that we can decide how many cases we need to create based on how many accounts got created. We're going to grab the ID of the running user so we can use their email address. And so then for every new account that got created, we're going to create a new variable called new case. It's a case variable. And then we're going to set the values for that case record, status of new, origin new account, subjects, and welcome package. The account ID is going to be related to that brand new account. The description is going to get completed. We're going to add a staff email address from the current user. And then we're going to add that new case to a collection. Then this is going to be a list collection because that's what we've got up here. And then we do an insert of our new cases. And so we insert them all at once. So if we look at this, we can see the same thing in our record triggered flow, except instead of doing this on a bunch of accounts at a time, we just do this for one account at a time because that's how our record triggered flow is set to fire. So our assignment value or variable here, element, not variable, sorry, is these lines of code. So in this assignment, we're just saying, hey, I've got a new case. I want you to set these fields to these values. Then our create a case element is this line down here. So after we've done all this, do that. Fairly simple and straightforward. Just kind of making sense. Little less scary to look at and know what's going on.
Yeah, it's so helpful to see the comparison with Flow. It really is.
It's doing the same thing. Just some things in Apex we have to do ourselves, like go get that running user and find their email address, and Flow serves it up to us in the running user global variable. So, and we have to do everything in bulk in Apex, and we do it on one at a time in Flow. So there's a few little differences, but really we're just managing to do the same stuff. Just one, you have to type it out, and the other one, you get a cool little point and click interface. Hey, no fighting. Okay, so record triggered flows are basically the Flow version of Apex triggers. So trigger context controls when your trigger is going to fire, like your flow conditions that you set in your start element. So we have 7 trigger contexts that a trigger can run in. So before insert and after insert, these are your creates. Before update and after update, these are your updates or edits. Before and after delete, and then after you undelete. So here's the interesting thing. Flow doesn't give you all these. You can do these 5 in Flow, but after delete and after undelete are unique to Apex. Flow does not have those as triggers. So if you want to do something on a delete, you've got to do it in Flow before the record actually gets deleted, because after that, nope, no can do, can't see it, can't get to it. I have no idea what you're talking about. And so we also in Flow have this concept of $record, and it's whatever record made the flow run. So today it might be the Acme account. Tomorrow it might be the Dunder Mifflin account. Well, we have the same kind of idea in triggers. So trigger.old is the same thing as $record prior. So every time you create a record or update a record, it has the old values of the record, has the new values of a record. So on a create, trigger.old is empty and record prior is empty because there was no old version of the record. We just created it. So trigger.new is the new record, or $record is the new record that you are creating right now. But if you do an update, let's say I have an Acme account and Acme got sold to the Roadrunner. And so Roadrunner has decided to rename the Acme to Roadrunner.inc. So if I had that running through a flow, $record prior would say Acme Inc. and $record would have the name as Roadrunner Inc. Same thing with trigger.old and trigger.new. Everything about the record before it got changed would be here in trigger.old, including that name. Everything in trigger.new would be whatever got changed. So Acme Inc., Roadrunner Inc. They also have the concept of maps with triggers because everything is in bulk. So again, think back to that VLOOKUP. If I have 200 records that get created through data loader, most of the time, if we're dealing with bulk in Flow, you need a loop, right? So I have a list of records here. I've got a bunch of sticky notes, and I'd have to go through them one at a time and be like, is this it? Nope. Okay. Is this it? Nope. Okay. Is this it? Nope. Is this it? I don't know about you, but I'm bored and I still have more to go. And so the cool thing is that in a map, it allows us to do that VLOOKUP and say, hey, I've got my new version of the record. I've got trigger.new. And it's the Acme Inc. record that got changed to Roadrunner, but the ID is 001, blah, 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 123. And so it can say, hey, you've got this whole list of old records over here, and I need to find the old version of that record, which is 001, blah, 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 123. And it goes, hey, it's that one. And I just went and pulled it right out. And I didn't have to look at every single one and be like, is this it? Is this it? Is this it? And so that's the concept of using a trigger.old map or trigger.new map to be able to quickly find a record and compare it. So here's the big deal with triggers. Okay, there's a lot of opinions on how Flow should function. You can have flow per trigger context. You can have multiple flows per object. On triggers, Lord of the Rings rules, all right? Highlander rules. There can be only one trigger to rule them all. So excluding managed packages where they create their own stuff and you have no control over it, you should only build one trigger. That way you can control the order that your code fires in every time because your trigger is what listens and says, all right, in this instance, here's the thing I need to go fire. And it always fires in the same order. If you have multiple triggers running on an object, they all wake up and run at the same time, kind of. They don't really, they go in an order, but that order is whoever gets there first this time, which could be different next time. And that could create a major mess. Okay, so if we look at a trigger versus a record triggered flow, it's the start element, right? So I have a file here on the left. So it's called a trigger, and we have to call it an actual trigger keyword. Then we name it account trigger. It's a super easy naming convention. It's the object and the word trigger. So trigger, account trigger, on account. If you can't figure out what object this is on, look at the name, look at the object. It's right there. Pretty straightforward. Then we set up our contexts. When do we want this to run? And I want to run this before insert, before update, after insert, and after update. But I don't care about delete or undelete, so I've left those out. So I have the same thing over here in my start elements. I have a record triggered flow on account that I want it to run when a record is created, and I want to optimize it for fast field updates. This right here is my before insert trigger on account. This start right down here, when on account a record is created and optimize and related records, this is my after insert. So this is just one of these. This one is another one of these. So you can do on created and updated. So you could do before insert and before update together, or after insert and update together in a flow. But again, since we only have one trigger, we put them all in this trigger here. So then we have to decide in this trigger, which of these four contexts am I actually in right now? So the trigger fires every time we hit the step in the order of execution. So then we just write a simple if statement, which is like a decision in flow. And so if trigger is insert, true, then we do the next line of code that's indented. If it's false, then we skip all the way down to the end of this and we do our else. So if trigger is insert, then we check and say is trigger before. So if we are in a before insert, then we're going to call the code in the account trigger handler class and the handle before insert method, and that's what's going to run. If it's an insert, but it's not the before context, it's the after context, then we'll run the account trigger handler class handle after insert method. Except it's been commented out, so it's actually saying don't do anything at this point. But at some point we wanted this to run and we basically said timeout, don't do this temporarily. It's like deactivating a flow. We can comment this out to basically deactivate it from Apex. So if it's not an insert trigger, it's an update trigger. So if trigger.isUpdate, then we go, all right, is it an after trigger? Yes, cool. Then go to the same class account trigger handler, but run a third different method called handle after update. And right now we don't have anything to run before an update. So while it's up here and we're getting ready to build something for that in the future, down here we don't check for it because we don't have anything to run. But this is how you can kind of figure out what are the contexts and how does this look between flow and Apex triggers to see when does this actually fire and what is it telling to go run. Here's our object. Here's our trigger statements. Make sense? Doing good? Okay. So we have a lot of cool formulas that we can use in flows. Can we do the same thing in Apex? Yeah, kind of. But they all use methods. So this dot add months and these parentheses are all special methods that Salesforce has built for us to be able to use. So I can actually say, hey, I need you to take a date and then add months to it and tell it how many months to add. I can say, hey, I've got some text. Can you tell me if it contains a specific word or phrase? And I can say, I just need you to give me what today's date is. Some other formulas, so we have the and or formulas. And you'll also see in Flow, there's the operator versions with the double ampersands or the double pipes. In Apex, you don't have the ability to use the functions with the parentheses like the ands, But you can do the same thing with this double ampersand operator. Now, there are that don't really have an equivalent in Apex. So there's not a way to do just a sum formula. You would have to loop through everything in Apex and be like, all right, here's my variable. Here's the thing I want you to add that to this variable, go find something else and do it again. You can't just be like, take these 3 things and add them up. So you can still do the work. You just have to do it a different way. And there's not a nifty little sum or is blank formula to be able to just real quick. So if we look at how this happens in Apex, I have an opportunity called new op that I'm going to create in Apex, and I'm going to set the close date of my new op to 6 months from today. So I set my close date field equal to date.today, which is how Apex says, just give me today's date. And then to that, I do the method that says add months and give it 6. So when I'm done here, what we'll do is my close date will be 7 plus 6, 13. All right, January 8th, 2026. So had to do the math there. In Flow, what we would do is we would build a formula and we would say add months to today of 6. And then we would take and use an assignment to set our new close date field to the evaluation of our formula. So it takes a couple of more steps to do this in Flow than it does in Apex because we can do this all on one line. But the date.today is the equivalent of the today formula here. And the add months method here with 6 is equivalent to the add months formula here. So pretty close, just slightly different. So a couple other things that we can do in Apex, we can actually do a SOQL query, which is basically a get records. And we can check and see how big that collection that came back was. So I have a list of opportunities called open ops. And I said, okay, go get me the ID from every opportunity in my org where is closed is equal to false. So that'll give me everything that's open. And then I create an integer variable and I call it count of open ops. And I set it equal to the dot size function. So open up size. And so this is just however many things you got back here, just tell me that number. To do this in Flow, what we would do is we would set a variable up called same thing, count open ops. And then we would use the equals count operator and apply that to our get records, which is the equivalent of this SOQL query up here. And we would get the same number down here as we do on this line here. So pretty well you can do all of the same things, just in a different way sometimes. All right, so flow decisions are big, right? That's how we branch our logic and figure out what should we be doing in certain situations. So we can do this in Apex with if, else if, else. And so we don't have to get all the way here. You have to have an if statement. The else if and elf are actually optional. So you could have a decision with multiple outcomes, just like a decision, and they evaluate in the order that they're written. So it'll start at the top and go down. First one that matches wins. So if you look at our flow decisions, you always have that default outcome. That's your else statement. So if nothing else matches, this is the last thing that you do. If you need to have multiple decisions in a row, you can use nested if statements. And so if the first one is true, then we can evaluate an additional condition. So a couple of differences. You don't have to have an else if or an else in Apex. You just have to have the if. And an if formula in Flow requires both the value if true and value if false as a general rule. So again, that's different from Apex. It doesn't require it. So flow decisions always have to have that default outcome. And sometimes it's just stop, do nothing, put the end element after it. But you always have to basically tell it what the default outcome should have happen. And you don't have to have that in Apex. So if we look at this, so let's take our handle before insert again. So we're taking our list of accounts, and for every account, we're going to look at that estimated annual sales field. And based on what the value of that field is, we're going to set our priority. So the way we would do this in a flow is we would start by creating an account, and then we would look at the estimated annual sales amount field. If it's at least 5 million, we'll do an assignment to set the priority to highest. If our outcome is between 3 and 5 million, so this is the second else if, then we set it to high. Between 1 and 3 million, it gets standard, and then everything else, our default outcome, which I hate default outcome, so I always rename it, gets priority of low. So if we need to do like decisions in a row, we can do the same thing. So in this, we have a public class called Opportunity Trigger Handler. And what we're doing is we're checking to see if we have a contact role on our op. So if the op stage name is closed won, and that's true, then we're going to go and we're going to see what type of op it is. So then if op type is new customer, we're going to set a task with these directions. So we're going to send them a new customer packet. Else, it's still closed won, but it's not a new customer, it's an existing customer, then we're going to create a task to send them a discount on their next purchase. So again, this first if statement, so if op stage name equals closed won, is this closed won decision here? And so if it's true, it's a yes. We go down this branch. And so then we go to our next if statement where we go, all right, so is it new customer? Down that path. Is it existing customer? Down this path. And again, we have to have that else. So everything else goes down here. I've skipped that over here because there's nothing down here between these two little curly brackets. I've just said new customer, do this. Existing customer, do that. I want you to do nothing if it's neither one of those. And so I can just skip it here. But I can't skip it over here with this all else. So just how all of those things match. All right, so loops. Who likes loops? Loops are confusing until you understand them, and then they're okay. I kind of like loops.
Like, love them while programming.
Right? So the traditional for loop that you'll use in Apex uses a counter variable. So this is how many times should we run something? An example I use this for a lot is I need to create 3 test accounts in my sandbox. And so I have a flow that will just build test data for me. And it says, okay, how many accounts do you want? And then for each of those accounts, how many opportunities do you want? And so we'll use a for loop with a counter variable to basically say, how many times have I gone through the loop? Did I create the first account? Yep. Did I create the second account? Yep. Did I create the third account? Yep. How many accounts did I ask for? 3. Okay, I got all those. We're done. So it uses a decision and assignment to visit a screen like X number of times. Before the repeater component came out in Flow, this is how you would have to deal with like adding multiple contacts to an account or adding multiple pets to a household or something like that. This for each loop is the loop in Flow. We have a collection or a list of items and we need to go through each one. So for each item in my list, go through it, make a decision, do something, whatever the appropriate action is. There's also this really cool SOQL for loop. If you're working with huge amounts of data, you can actually do a SOQL for loop that will say, hey, I need you to go get these records, but I know there's a ton, so get them for me in chunks, okay? So go get me the first 2,000 and we'll deal with those. And then when we're done, go back and get me the next 2,000 and we'll deal with those. There's no Flow equivalent for this because in a get records, you just get all the records that meet the criteria and you hope there aren't too many or you make your query so there's not. But there's no real Flow equivalent to handle this giant data volume. But it's kind of cool to see it in action. So a traditional for loop, so I have an integer of accounts to create 5, so I'm going to create new accounts. So for integer I equals 1, as long as I is less than my number of accounts to create, we're going to go through the loop, and every time we go through the loop, increment I by 1. So account is test account, 1, add this to a list of new accounts, and then we'll create them later. So then I go through for integer I equals 2, create another account, test account 2, go through it again. I is 3, we do 4, and we do 5. So then at the bottom here, I is now equal to 6. And so for integer I equals 6, is I less than or equal to 5? No. So we stop. And it says, all right, I'm going to skip all this and just go to the end. In Flow, what we do is we basically, instead of starting at 1 and going up to 5, we'll start at 5 and we'll go down to 0. So I'll check and say, hey, is my counter at 0? Nope. Okay, it's at 5. Then I create a test account. I add it to a list. I decrease the counter to 4. Is 4 equal to 0? Nope. Do it again. One more. 3, 2, 1. Now I set it to 0. Is my counter 0? Yep, sure is. Okay, we're done. Don't go through this anymore. Go the other outcome. So for each loop, so I have a list of 1 opportunities. And so for each one, I want to go through and add it up to get a sum total. And so I go get my 1 opportunities. That's my SQL query here. Then I loop through each one. This is my for loop here. And so then I sum the amount and I take the sum 1 ops and take the current value of it and add the amount of the current op in my loop. So if I go through here 3 times for $10,000 opportunities, 10,000, once more, 20,000, last time 30,000, then we're done. All right, so automations trigger. So I have a trigger on a custom object called stock item that I've called stock item trigger. It's a before delete. And so if that is triggered, we're going to go log a case when there's stock on hand. That's what we're going to call and have our Apex code do. In our start element, it's on the stock item object. It's when a record is deleted, and it's before that record is deleted. So then we're going to go through here and we're going to take a look, and it's going to call this particular this particular method, log case when stock on hand. So it's going to check and see if the current stock on hand when that record is deleted is not equal to 0. We're going to create a case and notify somebody that stock on hand, like a stock item, got deleted while there was still stock on hand. So here's what we do in our flow. We do a decision. Is our stock on hand 0? Nope, it's greater than 0. So we set our case values. And so we do that with an assignment. And then finally, we create the case. So, and if we look back at this, we do our comparison here. If current stock item on hand is not equal to 0, so that's our decision. Our case, new case with our subject and description is our assignment. And then our create is this insert cases to create statement down here. So same thing, 2 different ways. This flow does the same thing as that Apex class method. Decision, assignment, DML. All right, so we're just an hour in. Hopefully, I've helped you realize that Apex doesn't have to be scary. Maybe you're a little more confident being able to read some of that easy to medium Apex code. You're able to connect it to flow concepts and be like, okay, I understand what this is doing. Maybe you're ready to have a conversation with your dev buddies a little bit more effectively. And just maybe someday, if you look at Apex and you're like, oh, the pick list value, I need to change that. You're not totally terrified to go in and try. So I do have a resources document that houses a bunch of links that you can get to. So the QR code takes you to the document, and the document has all the links so you can actually get to them. I'm also happy to make this presentation available to y'all. So Amma, you should have a copy of it, but if not, let me know. And with that, thank you so much. Hopefully this was helpful. If you'd like to get in touch, ask questions, talk more, let me know. Also, I can totally hang out for a while and take questions if you've got any now.